U.S. adults make about 1.3 billion visits to shopping centers each month, or about 62 trips per person annually. While some outlets, like malls, have struggled to retain shoppers, foot traffic to strip malls is booming. Annual visits to strip malls surged 18% in 2023 compared with prior to the pandemic. Convenient shopping options, hybrid work, and millennials moving to fast-growing suburbs are driving that trend. And retailers are trying to get a slice of the action.
Macy's is trying to adapt to the changing retail environment, moving out of shopping malls and into suburban strip centers.
Macy's announced in 2023 it was opening 30 new small format stores in off-mall locations. Brands like Sephora and Starbucks are also moving in, as are fast food restaurants, making strip malls one of the hottest plays in commercial real estate. But
I'm curious if they're going to cover various aspects of this. I know strip malls certainly are much more prevalent than malls. So curious, one, if the development of these areas have changed in time. So I know in COVID, certainly a lot of malls basically shut down or struggled, especially just because how much real estate they have and the cost for upkeeping that. And then I'm sure that there's an aspect, especially if they're basing it around COVID, of I still see even in malls today that folks still go in with masks because potentially how crowded those areas can get, and that you're effectively inside of a building at that point. You're not outdoors, whereas strip malls obviously are a good portion outdoors. So at least you are in separate segments. So it's not like it's all one building attached. And so all the airflow is within that one building with all those individuals. At least it's compartmentalized. And you also have the outdoors that you go in and out of as you get there. So curious if they're going to explain more about this, if this is just a shift in COVID and folks' desire and willingness to be in kind of a crowded spaces like a mall, or if it has more to do with some of these other things, like logistically, it's way easier to build a strip mall than an actual mall. In that these are much more prevalent, so that could also relate to the increase, but curious to see what they say.
strip malls face criticism for being an eyesore to their communities, contributing to environmental problems, and blamed for the demise of traditional business districts.
When we think of strip centers, we kind of think of older, dilapidated strip malls that are lining the buildings in urban areas.
I wrote a book about shopping malls, and I mostly focused on indoor shopping malls because they're honestly much more interesting architecturally. People have deeper feelings of nostalgia for indoor malls because they have more sense of place and presence. I don't think that people have a lot of sentiment about strip malls because they're very utilitarian.
The U.S. has more than 68,000 strip malls from coast to coast, more than regional malls, super regional malls, neighborhood centers, and outlet malls combined.
I'm just going to pause there for a second so that folks can see these numbers for a moment. So this is kind of what I was mentioning, which is I didn't have actual numbers on this, but I'm sure any individual in the U.S. can probably see the number of strip malls that exist. I know that there's probably like a half dozen, maybe a dozen near me versus like one mall that's could be stated as relatively close. So you can certainly tell the difference between the scale at which these things are prevalent. And so it makes sense to me that if you have thousands of times or tens of thousands of strip malls and you have hundreds of outlet malls or regional malls, then obviously there's going to be way more opportunities to visit those areas. So that's probably about 100x, 200x the number of strip malls that exist. So certainly I would expect that number to play into some of this adoption and folks' readiness to use them, especially because if you have one outlet mall or one regional mall that's like in your state or in a broader area, that's much less convenient than having a strip mall that could be down the street from you or just off of your main street.
So how did the U.S. become bathed in strip centers? And could the format be the future of brick and mortar retail? A strip mall in general occupies a 10,000 to 50,000 square foot property of connected buildings dominated by a large parking lot with roughly 5 spaces for every 1,000 square feet of retail space. Usually located parallel to a major road or on a corner, they are also visible to thousands of potential shoppers who drive by each day. Most properties are 1-story tall and have fewer than 10 tenants that have traditionally included a mix of niche retailers like nail salons, liquor stores, and laundromats. With consumers seeking more convenient shopping options, visits to strip malls have surged.
These strip centers offer more of an in and out experience. So lines are shorter because of smaller stores. Parking's easier. They're usually, on your way home from dropping your kid off at school or on your way home from work.
Their growing popularity is also due in part to stores offering goods and services you can't get online.
We see these health services, urgent cares, for example, going into these strip centers. UPS, FedEx, with people ordering online, you see a lot of those in these strip centers where people just want a quick in and out return. You're also seeing a lot of specialized fitness studios.
The tenants in a strip mall within a neighborhood tend to be e-commerce proof, relatively recession proof, remote work proof.
And they provide inexpensive retail space for brands. Facing dwindling traffic, Macy's has opened roughly a dozen off-mall stores called Market by Macy's and Bloomies as the retailer pivots to fast-growing suburbs. The new stores are about a fifth of the size of traditional stores and offer a slimmed-down selection. While Macy's shares have underperformed the S&P 500 overall, sales of its off-mall stores have outperformed the rest of the company. Macy's said in February it was closing about 150, or a third, of its legacy stores.
New consumers, younger consumers, are not necessarily as inclined towards kind of the fortress mall experience as their parents may have been.
They're local, they're easy to get to. The format is simple to shop.
They're not doing this with the expectation that they're going to make a tremendous amount of new sales here. But it's a convenient place for consumers to pick up, to return, to touch and feel certain items, even if they order them and they're delivered the next day to their house.
The trend has other retailers clamoring for space too. Strip mall vacancy rates plunged to their lowest levels in decades, significantly below other property types, including both regional malls and neighborhood centers, which
That's pretty interesting. So I'm going to move myself over here a little bit. That's definitely a noticeable drop in vacancy rates. That makes sense to me. I would say certainly I've been to a couple malls recently, and you can actually notice sometimes wings completely empty. And so that certainly is something that I think is improving over time to some extent, even within the regional malls, but strip malls almost always have folks in them. Again, likely because there's less real estate, because for a mall, you're going to have the entire enclosing building, which is a larger footprint. They kind of highlighted the smaller footprint of a strip mall earlier, and usually less parking as well. I think most strip malls that I think of usually have a somewhat equivalent amount of space as they do for the area around it, for the malls themselves or for the stores. But in a regional mall, usually I think of the mall being kind of like encapsulated by parking. And so just due to the fact that like how shapes work, basically if you go around the building and you extend out quite a bit, that's actually going to be quite a sizable area. So there's a good chance that parking is 2-3x the size of a standard mall to be able to accommodate all the number of cars that would be necessary, especially since they're further away compared to these strip malls. So definitely I would expect the pricing of rent to be lower in a strip mall than it would be in a regional mall. And so this certainly could impact that, especially as the economy has been in a tough spot recently. And as things are going to surge, you're going to find the best bang for your buck, which seems to be what they're referencing here for Macy's, which is how do they find the most cost-effective way to do their business? And certainly this is going to make you look at potentially non-standard options, including these strip malls. So this is some great data that they have here.
Occupy up to 25 acres. Other brands exiting the mall in favor of outdoor properties include Bath & Body Works and Foot Locker. Strip malls got their start in the 1920s, but it was decades later when the format took off.
1950s is when the strip mall really came into fashion. It's suburbanization of this country. So we have the automobile now available for the masses. We have inexpensive construction processes, materials for small single-family homes. We have the highway.
The areas along the highways were pretty low-cost real estate initially because they weren't good places to build homes, but people hadn't really figured out what to do with them yet. So to build these very simple, often concrete block structures, one-story structures for strip malls was a cheap way to give space that was highly rentable to stores.
But today, rising costs and higher interest rates have put constraints on new strip mall construction, leading to higher rents for businesses. The average rent at strip centers in 2024 reached $20.95 per square foot, more than 17% higher than in 2019. Rising rates have given strip malls the title the king of retail real estate, and investors are taking notice. Site Centers, which owns and manages open-air shopping centers in high-income suburbs, is spinning off its portfolio of strip mall properties. The new company, called Curbline Properties, went public October 2024. Strip malls are also an attractive investment for commercial property owners because they are cheaper to purchase than large anchor retail shopping centers, and the landlord generally has less upfront costs.
Even if you buy an existing anchor shopping center, the large national 50,000 square foot store isn't going to move into a space exactly as is. And that cost is often on landlords to outfit the space for the 60,000 square foot Walmart or Target. If you invest in a strip center, typically you'll have these pre-cut boxes and you'll attract tenants that are essentially going to be ready to move into the space as is.
Most strip mall properties can be acquired for less than $5 million. Leases also typically have built-in rent increases, and some have what's called a percentage rent provision, where in addition to the minimum rent a tenant pays, a small percentage of their sales, roughly 3 to 5%, goes to the property owner as additional rent.
So as a tenant, this may be attractive because your landlord has a financial interest in keeping the surrounding area occupied, clean, maintained, attractive, so that more customers are attracted to their tenant stores.
The tenant demand is there, the consumer demand is there, and when you look at a lot of other investment opportunities within commercial real estate, there's a lot of question marks.
While strip malls offer shoppers a convenient option to pick up last-minute items and find services, they aren't a perfect fit for everyone.
It discriminated those that didn't have an automobile. Yes, there might have been a bus route, but for many that have taken buses in the United States have never been that great.
On top of that, strip malls face environmental concerns.
They're set in front of a parking lot that also tends not to be landscaped on a road that is also asphalt. So you get a very large heat island effect from strip mall development. A lot of times, since they were built so cheaply, they were built on cheap land, and frequently that land can be in a bottom or a wetland. And so you'll see a lot of puddles in their parking lots after a big rain because there's actually groundwater seeping up from below as well as rainwater from above, and it has nowhere to drain if everything is asphalted.
But new investments could see many strip malls rehabilitated, with some converted into multi-use spaces. One survey found consumers in 3 Pacific Northwest cities said they were willing to pay 8.8% more for goods and services in well-landscaped strip malls versus one without greenery. The survey was mailed to 1,200 households. Strip malls could also be used to solve some of the nation's housing.
So before they get into this housing crisis segment here, it is great to see that there is some alignment of incentives for the strip mall owners and the businesses that exist there. So obviously they previously mentioned the fact that the landlords in this segment get a 3 to 5% kind of royalty or dividend or portion of profits from the stores themselves. And then again, here they're kind of highlighting specifically that folks who are shopping in these areas are actually more inclined to spend more money in an area that's kind of well maintained, that it has greenery, that they're adding some quality of life for the shoppers. And so this is where, again, they're both incentivized for the same thing, which is the more the shopping center or landlord does to make the area attractive to potential customers, the more money the units and the businesses within those strip malls do, and then therefore even more money goes back to the landlord again. So usually that's a great thing to see in certain businesses, is kind of this like positive feedback cycle where um, when once things start going in, they kind of build on each other, and especially when the incentives of both parties are aligned, in this case basically making the area as good as possible increases profits for both parties, is also fantastic to see. I think that's usually one of the things when you're looking for a good business. Ideally, that is one of the scenarios for you and your customers, is hopefully the better your customer does, the better you do as a business, because then that will make the life of the business and the business owner much easier. And so that is good to see in this example, and probably also why there's a good portion of these strip malls being built out and succeeding. Though I would expect this same exact phenomenon to work at a regional mall or an outlet mall, where the more attractive the building is and the more attractive kind of the amenities are there, the more likely folks are going to visit that particular location, and then folks would therefore be more likely to spend money if they're enjoying themselves and there's more folks there. So curious if they'll touch on that, but it seems like they're touching on this housing crisis. Maybe this is just going to be a offshoot from the original topic, and they'll circle back later.
Shortages. Converting just 10% of the US's 947 million square feet of strip mall space could create 700,000 new multifamily homes.
The strip mall that I see as being successful now, and even more so into the future, is set up more like a small community, a small town in a lot of ways, where you may even have stores at the ground level and an apartment on a second or third level. More green space, more walkways, pedestrian-only areas.
That's an interesting aspect of what they were describing. So they're showing here kind of like a city area, and basically in a classic city, especially as things get more packed, often all of the first floor is retail space, and then there's usage above it for businesses or homes. And so basically what they're highlighting here is that maybe strip malls could basically adopt this form of architecture. So that way strip malls aren't just the retail space itself. It could also include real estate for housing. Though that's certainly an interesting aspect. I think, at least from my personal experience with other folks who get themselves involved in real estate, usually you're targeting different markets at that point. So I'm not sure if this is something that the strip mall owners are going to really be getting into without some very noticeable incentives. So what I mean by that is, if you're a landlord of another human being for like a standard apartment, that's a particular niche within the market. And even there's sub niches of like short-term versus long-term rentals. There's also multifamilies versus single families. And that's a different type of individual compared to retail space. And so again, they even highlighted previously that one of the large owners had actually even segmented out just the strip mall portion of their business, because that's a particular niche. And so usually if you're focusing in on a particular area, you're not thinking about these other areas as well, because then you can hyper focus and optimize your business for that segment. And so somebody who's going into the commercial space and doing something like a strip mall to find businesses that can rent there, that's not the same individual necessarily who's looking to have tenants for their homes in an apartment building. And those have different aspects of their business that they need to optimize, like how you look for a normal individual to rent an apartment is different from how you interact with a business. Because for business purposes, if you own multiple strip malls, you could potentially set up an agreement where this particular business tries out a specific location in one of the strip malls, but you could then quickly sign them up to multiple units in the various strip malls that you own. You can't do that with a normal tenant, for instance, because obviously they just usually rent the one place they live in. And so the incentives and how you run your business are different here. So I do agree with the sentiment of if that were to happen, that probably would be a boon for the housing crisis, but it seems unlikely in so much as then you start kind of commingling different segments of real estate. And usually, as a business owner, you're really trying to hyper focus in on your core product and making that as good as possible, streamlining your acquisition of customers, streamlining your costs. And these are different types of things. The type of advertisement you do, the type of contracts you do are different. And so it seems unlikely until the point where maybe things are so packed that there's very little space left except for these options, potentially like in cities themselves. I'm not sure if I would expect somebody who's building a strip mall in alongside a highway to be planning to do apartments for individuals, because that's again not kind of what they're targeting for with their core business. So curious if they'll explain why they think this, other than this would just be a nice thing for folks.
Places for outdoor dining.
But will strip malls become the future of brick and mortar retail? Some think it has a bright future.
We need what we need when we need it. And strip malls offer that convenience to pop in and out and get those kind of services that you can't order online.
The apocalypse never came for retail. We recognize that it just was a constant evolution, and it's about getting the tenants right. And now there is a new formula for getting that right.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I've definitely been seeing that even in standard malls where there's like dental offices now and other things that I've never seen before there, because I think folks are rethinking how that space is used. But this was a really informative video. Thank you for watching. If you like what you saw, please hit like or subscribe. I'll see you around.